Well, howdy ho there, folks. How are we doing today? Hope you're all doing absolutely peachy keen, fantastic, fine, good, great. Today I'm going to be playing a little bit of System Shock 2. Might just do a straight up playthrough again because, honestly, I really like this game. Even though I get lost and then I have to do puzzles and I go, I don't understand the puzzle. But, you know, hey. It is what it is, not I mean Jimmy Dean. Also, I'm playing a lady this time, so she has a pink and blue nail polish. I don't know about you, but if I was gonna paint my nails, my little cat claw type nails, you know, the little ones on my fingies here, I would probably... Oh, they're talking. I'd prefer it if they weren't. Okay, I was basically just like sitting there listening to a lady and bouncing up and down. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit today about like what belief means and, you know, how faith works. And also, oh, that was bad. There we go. Wata! Want to do one more? Gotcha. But I want to talk about like why people believe certain things and, you know, things that have kind of caused me issues. Isn't exactly the right thing, but I do get a little concerned when people just start telling me certain things about faith. See, Catte used to not really believe in God. Basically, I went from Islam to atheism, back to then having a faith in terms of basically being a Buddhist, and then eventually getting to where we are now with our wondrous mother, which, you know, she's my favorite. But, you know, we're talking like years of skepticism and other things kind of eventually translating into this. And during that entire time, I still always felt like the desire to have like a spiritual life and to have it's kind of fun to have like a little thing that they can blink in there. New code, so that's the F3. What did it say to read? How do I read? How do I read? Media 450. Okay. But basically, I would go through these different things, and I was trying to figure out what I believed and why. And, you know, I was very skeptical. Part of the reason for it is, ow. Part of the reason for that is simply that I think it's actually fairly difficult to demonstrate for like in a scientific way that God exists, or, you know, what exactly works and what doesn't work, and like what you need to like know and not know, that sort of thing. And it was basically me having multiple really powerful experiences. One was hey, excuse me. One was, you know, I read the Bhagavad Gita for the first time in a number of years, and it was just like really clicking on every single level, and just, and I, okay, so now she's done. But and, you know, really going through it, and then, you know, I was reading about Ramakrishna, and as I was reading about Ramakrishna, I found out more about Kali, because, you know, and I learned all about all that through Swami Sarvabhayananda online. He just had like a lot of really interesting courses on, and he really had these very interesting courses on the idea of so I think no, because it oh, okay, there we go. Suppose it should be simple this time, so it should be fairly easy for me to get through this. One would hope. Excuse me. Busy. Was busy. Wait. So... there we go. Ooh, it's a nice H pattern. But, you know, so I was trying to figure out more about that, and I ended up praying to Ma Kali one time. I just set up like a simplistic little that was a lot of noise. A simplistic little prayer area to try and you know, try out praying to the Divine Mother, and it ended up working out for me. I had a really powerful experience. I felt like I was being lifted off the ground and kind of almost like choked. And as it finished, I really felt like I had this really profound experience. I felt great. You know, afterwards it was kind of interesting. And then, you know, that really began my journey into Shaktism. And now, you know, several years later now, here we are and loving it. Big bad and loving it. But it was really very useful to me, and all this stuff has really helped me. But at the same time, you know, it's kind of hard to be like, oh well, you know, you just gotta believe or whatever. Like, I don't want to just like say that to people, because I don't really think that's like a good answer. I understand. Where to keep the skull on the left? But like, it can be difficult if someone hasn't had these experiences, or if someone, you know, isn't super spiritual, for someone to just walk up to them and be like, oh yes, but you know what you have to do is you have to believe in a bunch of stuff that probably doesn't make any real sense to you where you're at right now, and you're going to be like thinking it sounds silly. Or, you know, if they have bad experiences with other religions, just being like, oh yeah, you just got to believe, you just got to have faith. Like, it really doesn't work, right? So I do appreciate when people try to make arguments for like God and like different divine things, but I tend to think that it doesn't really always work out super well. So sometimes I would listen to like people doing like different apologetics for different things. Oh, it's F to read. Oh, nope, that has nothing in it I need. And like, you want to that's weird. Is this the lights? It is the lights. Okay. And like, you know, I understand the desire to like prove or provide evidence for these things, but I really do think that in a lot of cases it's a much more effective if people will have their own experiences and, you know, also come to things their own way, because different things are going to be more convincing to different people. I personally have to admit, for instance, that I find most of the time listening to specifically Christian apologetics just does absolutely nothing for me. And Muslim apologetics I'm pretty familiar with, because, you know, for a long time, 4 years or so, I was a Muslim who was going around basically trying to convert everybody to Islam. So, you know, I'm fairly familiar with a lot of those arguments. I don't really think, for instance, that the scientific things are actually all that, like, convincing. Like if you know a little bit about, like, what's actually said in the Quran and what people are saying, and just, like, really some basic science, a lot of it is just not very convincing, I don't think. Of course, some people would disagree, and hey, man, you do you. I'm not too worried about it. I'm just saying, if you sat there and gave me all these scientific miracles, like, it wouldn't really convince me of one thing, one way or another. And that's kind of like one of the issues with a lot of this stuff, is that some of it is also just going to depend on the person, right? Because, for instance, I will also say that if someone is trying really hard to convince me of something, I will probably be actually much more resistant to whatever they're trying to sell me, because that's kind of the thing. Sometimes you talk to like people doing apologetics, and it really just kind of feels like they're like trying to convince you of something that's just, in a lot of cases, seems kind of silly and doesn't really seem like it does very much for you. Or they're like it feels like they're trying to sell you something, like they're trying to get you to join their religion, and, you know, all these other things. And, you know, they get brownie, depending on the sect and things like that, they'll probably get brownie points if they convert you, or if they can say they converted you. But in a lot of cases, people will also not tell you the whole story. They won't tell you the whole thing before they try to get you to convert. All this other stuff. Like, for instance, Hinduism. I rather like a lot of Hinduism. I rather like specifically Advaita Vedanta and non-dual Tantra. Those two are very appealing to me, and they've done a lot for me. I also like a lot of Taoism, and as I've learned more about Taoism, depending on the exact version, and I'm not going to get into all the different, like, slightly different variations on that. And some of them are way different, whatever. I'm not going to get into that right now. But, you know, like, Taoism, a lot of the philosophical elements of that, especially, like, doing things like, reading, you know, Zhuangzi, trying to piece together some of what's going on there. And, you know, by piece together, I mean, like, listening to explanations and understanding, trying to come to an understanding through, like, the original Chinese as much as I can. Because I did, or, like, translations of the original Chinese, because I don't speak or read Mandarin, or, I don't think that one will be in Mandarin, but, you know, I don't speak or read ancient Chinese. So, oh, that one's useless, so we want this one, I think. Yeah. Would this be better? No. I think what we need is to get... Do we want both? Is there another plug? It doesn't look like it. You're now seeing why the first run took me so long. But then if you plug into that one, it just... Oh yeah, I guess it doesn't matter. So you only need the 2 plugs. So it's gonna be... Pause for a moment. I did it. It did not take me a very long time, probably. Anyway. Yeah, so you see people arguing all these different things. Hinduism in particular had this issue of, like, people kept telling me that, oh, well, you know, you need to get a guru. And, yeah, that sounds fine. But, you know, being on the outside for such a long time and reading about the amount of, like, sexual abuse that was going on among, like, a lot of gurus and a lot of, like, really famous ones too, and, like, people just, like, allowing it to happen. Then on top of that, knowing that, like, there's reasons that ancient manuals will mention, like, people having, like, false ideas of enlightenment and things like that. It's like, I don't know how many people I would trust to be a guru. Now, if it's simply that you're looking to trust someone who's initiated and knows like what the practices are and things like that, I can understand that to a certain extent. But even then, I would probably tend... Hey, don't you shoot at me. Guns are not for you. Guns are just for me. Ow, 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 stop that. Of course I'm clear to be here. Here's my clearance, the pipe. But, and you know, there's stuff like that. There's also the whole thing about, like, you can really clearly see that some people seem willing to excuse pretty much anything that a guru does. And of course, there's the whole idea that, well, your guru is God or connected to God. So, you know, you gotta go and accept whatever they tell you. And that's just not really flying with me. You know, like... It's really hard to sit there and be like, ah, yes, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go have faith in this random schmuck. And that's the other thing, is there's like a whole, basically, industry of, like, fake gurus. Of people, like, running around, faking enlightenment, faking their, like, ideas, faking, like, all kinds of things. Or like, they'll go around and they'll tell you... They'll tell you that, like, you know, oh, they can do miracles, or they have some magic power. Which, I'll just be real with you, I don't actually find, like, someone having a magic power all that convincing. Like, one of the things kind of interesting about miracles is that, like, if you actually stop and think about it, they're not really proof of God or anything like that. What they're proof of is the ability to do a miracle. And like that doesn't necessarily mean that you know, if someone does a miracle, you have to discount it. I mean, if you see like an actual miracle in front of your eyes and there's not another explanation, or at least not another explanation at the time, like it does make sense to have like some faith in it. And like I said, I've had personal experiences that are pretty crazy, but at the same time, you know, like I wouldn't count on those to convince someone else because they happen to me, right? So if I just like walked up to you and like, oh hey, I had these several experiences and these several visions, like you wouldn't just believe right off the bat that they're like from God. Probably you'd probably think, okay, well, you had some kind of experience, maybe you think I'm crazy, maybe you think all kinds of things. But that's sort of what we're getting at, is that so much of the spiritual world is very personal, where like things that make sense to one person are not necessarily going to make sense to somebody else. Sometimes you're going to have a hard time. But yeah, so you know, like I think it's kind of difficult to have like just straight trust in any random person, and some of them, some people are, you know, like legitimate and seem to like really have like reasons for you to trust them. Other people seem to be kind of trying to sell you a bunch of hokum, and ultimately I think, you know, what's going to convince you and what's going to convince me are probably going to be different things. What is going to inspire you to follow a path and, you know, give yourself to it is going to be different. For me, one of the main things is just results. I'm happier now. I feel better doing meditation and praying to Ma Kali, and I feel like I'm getting a genuine connection to the divine by doing so. You know, like it's easy to justify following and doing certain things in that regard, and it doesn't cost me anything. But when you start introducing the idea of gurus and stuff like that, I'm not going to say that they're all full of shit, because I don't think that's true. However, I'm not very easily convinced of a lot of these guys, and I'm definitely not convinced of certain specific cases. I've also read, you know, a decent amount of like people out there who will like whatever random bonk. That didn't do anything. Like you know, like these random elements of like, oh yes, this is the real truth, the big truth, because, you know, such and such person did such and such thing, so you have to believe it. I'm not a fan of that. I think that a lot of this is just like eventually like people start arguing about evidence, and like people will tell you how convincing their evidence is, and then you'll look at them and be like, that's insane, that's not convincing at all, that's like meaningless. Or you can do that, you know. I have on several occasions found myself thinking that the things that people talk about when they talk about like, oh man, like the scientific evidence for Islam, for instance, is like really not very convincing in any meaningful way. Oops. It's like not really very convincing in any meaningful way. Okay, we're not quite. Oh wait. Oh, too much. Well, this is just one stream energy. Nope, that's too much. We just did that. Nope, too much. Okay, we're pausing again. Yay! Also didn't take me too. I'm glad that these aren't taking me as long. You can't see how long, but it's like, it's the first time I went through this game, it took way longer than it should have. It's okay, big brain cat. But yeah, like people will argue with you about like evidence. People will tell you that like, oh yes, these are like, how can you deny this evidence? And then it's like, sometimes it's as easy as like looking at the evidence and realizing that what they're saying doesn't actually, like, you know, make any sense. Like I've had people try to tell me that something is like an obvious evidence that like Jesus resurrected, but like anything they will display just doesn't really seem to actually equate to that. Or people will tell you like, oh yes, you have to believe because this is proof, and then like if you don't immediately go along with what they're saying, they'll get mad at you basically. Oh, but yeah, that's kind of one of the things, is that like it kind of took a long time and a lot of like meditation, a lot of work for me to get to the point where like I started to have faith in God again. And you know, now I feel like my faith is very strong, But like ultimately, like, my faith is in like God, and then like these certain teachings which have come to make a lot of sense to me, not necessarily. Yeah, listen to this one too. Oh, never mind. I wait till one of these has like the code for the armory on it. That's what I want. But, you know, and you know, people will tell you things like, "Oh, you just gotta believe this or this." Like, look, if you just told me that there's like a binary between believing and not believing, and there's just like basically there's like Christianity or something and atheism, and that's it. Like, I would understand where you could get off on the idea of just living, or get off saying something like, "Oh yeah, no, it's just about like you have to have faith." It's like, yeah, but then these get into much more complicated things. Yeah, so I think it's all very complicated. I think the problem tends to be, what it really boils down to is, I think it's perfectly fine for people to have their beliefs and for people to believe in a variety of things and to tell you things and to try and talk to you about, hey, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. There we go. That was broken, isn't it? Yep. And for people to, and you know, I think if you really believe, for instance, like that if someone doesn't like convert or something, oh gosh dang it.
Todd got the combination for the armory on medical. It's 705.
705, okay.
Some of the survivors went ahead for the flight deck and escaped. Others want to track for the bridge. They think that if we can take the man offline, we can retake the station. I'm to take out the on Darcy's plan. Together we will do this.
If you say so. But yeah, I think that, like, and if you really believe that, like, if someone doesn't convert their, or like doesn't accept Jesus Christ their Lord and Savior, what the hell ever, they're going to hell. I think it does make sense to be like adamant about pushing it, but I also feel like it doesn't really make a whole heck of a lot of sense. Like, I feel like what I've noticed a lot of is, like, there will be people who, excuse me, there will be people who will tell you that, like, well, the Bible says X, and then therefore XYZ is true. But like sometimes I think that kind of forgets the whole idea of, like, you don't have to stick strictly to thinking about like the Bible when you think of these things, right? Like, you can just think about it from an outsider's perspective, and a lot of that stuff stops making sense. Like, oh, it says here that the X person is going to go to hell and they're going to burn forever. And it's like, why would you believe that if it wasn't for like a certain book? Excuse me. Hi, how you doing? Ow. Man. But yeah, and it would make sense to like try and encourage people to, you know, believe these things and all this other stuff. But I also think one of the things that will start to happen is that, like, you know, that doesn't really make any sense. Like, and every time I talk to like someone about like why would God set this up in such a way where like you had to believe a very specific thing about a very specific person. Oh, hello. Like, to actually, you know, like not just go to hell forever. And we're not just talking about like, oh man, you don't get into heaven. We're talking about like actual eternal suffering forever. I don't think that really makes any sense. It just as a test, it doesn't make any sense. Like, but a lot of this other stuff. But, you know, some people will sit there with you and they'll try to like square the circle. They'll try really hard to like make it make sense, or try to like tell you things that like, oh no, you just had to believe this. It's like, but why would I believe that? Well, because, or like, oh well, it's the truth. It's like, okay, how do you know it's the truth? And then everyone gives you like these incredibly personalized answers, basically. Ah, gosh dang it, I thought I could jump.
You are not welcomed here.
I'm not.
Move yourself.
I think I'm very welcome here. Look at how welcome I am. And like people will tell you all these different things about like what you have to believe and what you know makes sense to them, or they'll like tell you things that don't even like really seem to jive with what they're telling you, like faith wise makes sense. It's very weird. For oh wait, was I supposed to flip a switch or something in here? Oh, there's a big glowing lever. Gotta look out for those glowing levers. But yeah, like people will tell you all kinds of stuff, and it's just like, look, I understand why people believe different things. I understand a lot of it. I think. I think that some people. I think he can actually just like straight up step on his own mine. Excuse me. Well, I'm glad I saw you. Who the heck was that? But and you know, it's good that people have, you know, the freedom and the ability to believe different things. It's the only time it's actually like ever become like a problem in any way is when you start trying to like justify like what they believe, and they feel this need to like try to justify to you why they believe, and they'll tell you things that sometimes just sound, you know, like I said, just straight up kind of crazy. Like, look, if you really believe something, that's fine, I suppose, but you gotta understand that, like, sometimes your, like, own personal reasoning won't make any sense the second you, like, open your mouth and, like, try to explain to someone who doesn't, like, have the exact same thing going on. But people will also act like, you know, they're...
Standard station restoration procedures online.
I'm glad you have the ability to say cyborg. We'll act like their way is the only way that makes any sense, and then everybody will get into these really, it's like one of these, it's actually really interesting because like I'm in like a couple of religion discords where sometimes I'll talk to people about like what they believe and why, right? It is kind of crazy because sometimes like when you look in these discords, for instance, you'll just have people have these increasingly like nitty-gritty beliefs that have to be divided down to like the very basic thing, where you have to go like everything has to be almost like personalized, otherwise it's not going to make sense. And even then it's like people will start using titles for things that are like that will not make any sense outside of like the way they're using it. And people are like this with faith all over the place. I've like, you know, heard about people who are like, no, if you go to the church across the street, you're probably going to hell, like, because they believe XYZ, and that's like whole thing. No, I can't vaporize that? Okay, that's fine. We'll just drop. And that's kind of the whole thing about religion, is like, for me personally, I just go by what makes sense to me. What works when I stop and think about it. What goes in and comes out and still makes sense after I've thought about it for a bit. And if the answer is simply that, well, this would be nice, but I don't think it's actually true, well, then you shouldn't believe it. Or if the answer is something more like, well, this is just what's true because my book says it, that's also, I don't really think, a great... Like, even if you trust a book overall, I feel like you have to be willing to, like, take some things with a grain of salt. Like, I really like a lot of the things that, like, Jesus says, but we could get into, like, hour-long talks about, like, whether or not, like, the things that are being said here are actually, like, trustworthy in the sense of, like, can we think that historical Jesus said these things? Or is this simply something that was like added later on? Like, one of my favorite stories in the Bible is the story of like the woman caught in adultery, and then Jesus, you know, saying, like saying, let him without sin cast the first stone, and basically saves the lady from being stoned. And like that's awesome. The truth is, that seems to come from like medieval manuscripts, and like it looks like it's a much later edition. Does that mean that we can't use that story and that it's not still a great story? Well, no, I don't think that at all. I think that if we're just... Hey, I have to complete my animation. I think if we're just talking about like, is there like a conveyor deployment system of these things underneath here? If we're just talking about whether or not like something physically happened in history, like that's a different kind of story. Like I get a lot out of the Bhagavad Gita. If you asked me if I thought it was a historical event, I'd probably say probably not, or if it is, it's probably greatly exaggerated. Does that mean that the spiritual knowledge and wisdom within the Bhagavad Gita is not useful? Like, why do you give elevator serving? If you say so. But yeah. But yeah, so I think that this is all important stuff to think about. And part of the reason I want to discuss this is because, to me, I think that there is things that you can be reasonable about with faith. And I think that faith based on some foundation of either experience or like results or, you know, evidence, anything like that is better and stronger than if you just scream, go buy the book or go do this or do whatever. It's like, and I mean, a lot of people who just basically just will just sit there and act like they've said the most logical thing in the world to you, but then they'll basically just be babbling. They'll just tell you random nonsense that doesn't make any sense at all. And the only reason it seems to make sense to them is because it justifies a book, or, you know, that's at least what it appears to be. Obviously you can't know someone's real thoughts and stuff like that. But, you know, I think that this is important to kind of sit there and try to figure out. But I do think that that's the best thing. And, you know, I would say I would definitely still tell people that they should have faith and they should, you know, do good things and know that, you know, sometimes spiritual progress takes time. But I also understand why, like, if you're like an atheist and you say like, oh, I don't believe in any of that. I mean, I get it. Like, a lot of it would have made way less sense to me until I had these experiences and until I went through what I went through. And like, you know, I've been using my mind to figure out what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. I put time into different practices and what yields results. And, you know, of course, sometimes it takes longer for something to yield results. There's all kinds of stuff going on there. But I think that we can get to a point where things make more sense, where we're willing to dive in and actually dissect these things and get more out of it. If you spend all of your time sitting there trying to convince me that Jesus and everything in the Gospels is 100% historically accurate, I think that you can do that if you really want to, but I think you're missing the point. I think you're missing the point of reading these Gospels, taking the teachings from them, and using them to live a good life and to get closer to God, rather than, you know, simply reciting that something has to be true. Look, believe it or not, our human perceptions, well, okay, your human perceptions, you know, Cat, I got the different things going on, don't worry. Anyway, but human perception is fundamentally flawed in a lot of ways. We tend to act like we're trying to, like, justify our own existence and our own beliefs more than we're trying to look strictly for the truth. And I think it's a good idea for us to all, you know, have faith and to have something that we firmly believe in, but we also have to be willing to examine those things and be willing to reevaluate things. And I don't know, I just felt like saying that because I've been having a lot of conversations lately with people in different Discords and different other things, you know, various other chat applications, and it seems like a lot of people basically just want to throw their faith at you. And if you don't immediately accept it, they go crazy. And I think that we can be much more reasonable about this. I think we can be good people. And of course, you should know that God, at least I think, and I have experience that makes me think this, is God loves everybody, even if they're atheists or, you know, not believers of whatever variety. And I also think that, you know, Ramakrishna was right. All these different spiritual paths can still lead you to God. You don't have to believe a specific thing. You know, like if you just look, Meister Eckhart and, you know, Meister Eckhart, St. Francis of Assisi, Ibn Arabi, Ramakrishna, Chaitanya, all these people practiced and believed and did different things, and they still seem to connect to God. So, I don't know. I think that there's something really valuable there. Anyway, that's just what I wanted to say. I wanted to ramble on for a little bit. I hope that you all have an absolutely wonderful day. And you know that I love you and God loves you, and no matter what you do, you're still loved and welcome at Cat House. Big hug for all. Okay, have fun. God loves you. Bye.